So I'll welcome everybody today to Theresa's Camino del Santiago Trail Talk. I'm Dana Mastriani from the Rockport Library. Thanks everybody for joining us. We're proud to have this beautiful and interesting event happening tonight. I, for one, am looking forward to doing this myself. I'm sure many of you are also. So this will be a great little preview of what to expect. Regarding tonight's presenter, if you could please keep your audio muted. At the end, Theresa will circle back and we'll have an opportunity for questions. If you're anything like me and you may not remember an hour from now, please feel free to put it in the chat and I will be sure to share that at the end with Theresa. But for now, I would just like to welcome everybody. Hiking the Camino de Santiago Trail, France to Spain. Theresa Fersch didn't always consider herself an adventurer, but in 2015, she found herself in the middle of rural Spain, hiking the Camino de Santiago. The Camino is a 500-mile pilgrimage traveled by pilgrims for over 1,000 years. It is said to bring great physical, mental, and spiritual growth to all who travel its routes and provide continuous examples of kindness, generosity, friendship, and love. The Camino gives people the opportunity to experience life it is meant to be. Join us as Theresa shares her own adventures in hiking this famous trail. Welcome, Theresa, and welcome everybody from our audience.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually very excited about this because with the whole COVID thing, there were several years where we weren't giving as many talks, and I'm so glad that we've been able to do this again. So thank you all for joining. Normally, if we were in person, I would ask you to raise your hands if anyone has heard of the Camino before, or if you're here because you're interested in hiking it. But as Dana said, I'm going to leave time at the end so we can have an open discussion. This is a nice small group. So please keep track of your questions. And Dana, thank you for offering to keep track of the chat because I can't necessarily see it when I'm presenting. And I'll answer all of your questions at the end. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about two separate things. First, I'm going to go through and talk about what an average pilgrim can expect on a day on the Camino de Santiago. Like there are a few common things that everyone experiences. So I'll go through that. And then the second portion of my talk, I'm going to talk about my personal experience because everybody's journey is very personal. It's very private, and I can really only speak to my experiences. So backing up a little, just to get started, I hiked the Camino de Santiago in 2015. I was inspired to do that because the year before, my husband hiked the entire length of the Appalachian Trail, which is about 2,200 miles. And when he came back, he said, Theresa, you have to do something amazing for yourself. You have to have your own adventure. It'll change you. So I sought out for a similar adventure, but one that spoke to me, and the Camino is what happened. So I hiked between May and June of 2022. If you're going to be hiking the Camino and you have questions about when is the best time, we can certainly talk about that later. So you should be able to see my screen and you should see my slides changing. So to give you a little background about the Camino de Santiago is over 1,000 years old. It is a Christian pilgrimage. And my slide says over 200,000 pilgrims hike it every year. That was true in 2015. However, it has become explosively popular, and I believe that number has more than doubled since then. Originally, people hiked the Camino for religious reasons. However, now only about a third of the people who hike the Camino do it for a religious pilgrimage. People hike the Camino for all kinds of reasons. They do it because they're looking for adventure. They do it because they're looking for answers in their life. They're doing it just because. There are lots of reasons. Some people are walking in the memory of a loved one. Lots of reasons. There are technically hundreds of routes all around Europe that are considered the Camino, but what they all have in common is they all end at the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela, which supposedly lie the remains of St. James the Apostle. They all have that in common. Now, if you look up the Camino, there are really 5 or 6 most popular routes. I hiked the most popular route, which is the Camino Frances. This is the French Camino route. It's a little confusing because you spend most of your time in Spain, but it's called a French route because you start in France. So if you look at the map, in the upper right, you'll see France. You start the Camino in a very small town called Saint-Jean. You cross over the Pyrenees Mountains, which goes over the border into Spain. You pass through Pamplona, where they have the running of the bulls every year. And you walk all the way across that red line from right to left, hitting all of those towns. There are like lots of little rural towns along the way, about 5 larger cities. And you end all the way to the west, almost to the coast in Santiago de Compostela. Now, some pilgrims choose to continue their hike beyond Santiago, and they walk all the way to the coast. There is a very cool town called Murcia there, and Finisterre, which means the world's end. So some people like to finish their hike there. I had already hiked 500 miles by the time I got to Santiago, so I took a bus for the rest of that trip. I felt at that point I had done my pilgrimage and I was a tourist at that point. But lots of people choose different routes for different reasons. I chose the French route because it has the most infrastructure along the way, and I was going alone. So it was important to me that I had lots of places and lots of options to stop, to eat, to drink, to rest, to spend the night. And so there's just more along that route. And that was why I personally chose that route. But let's back up a little. How do you prepare for something like this? If you're going to hike the Camino or do any big adventure, I will tell you the first thing you should do to prepare is to tell everyone. Just start talking about it. If you have a dream, start talking about it, because what happens is you start telling everybody and eventually you're going to be like, oh my God, I actually have to do it now. So just tell everyone. When I first heard about the Camino, it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I instantly texted one of my best friends and I was like, I'm going to hike the Camino de Santiago. And I didn't even know anything about it yet, but I told everyone. But eventually everybody will share that dream with you and they'll be excited for you, and that helps encourage you. This picture is just the day before I left for the Camino. My husband threw me a surprise party and all of my closest friends came to wish me well. And Brian made this great seafood dish to kind of make me think of Galicia, which is one part of the Camino. The second thing is to train. Training is very important. This is a very strenuous physical activity. That said, I didn't train, not at all. I'm a systems engineer and I sit at a desk 8 to 9 hours a day. And in the before times, before COVID, I spent an hour and a half a day in the car commuting. So there wasn't a lot of time to train. I point this out because so many people want to hike the Camino or do something physically strenuous. I want to point out a lot of times when I talk about big adventures, it's not just the Camino. This can apply to any kind of big adventure you want to do. They think they're not physically fit enough. And I cannot stress or emphasize enough that anybody can hike the Camino. There are different accommodations. There are different ways in which you can do it. So please, if you're thinking you want to do this and you're not physically fit, or maybe you think you're too young or too old or not healthy enough, there are options. So if this is your dream, find those options and figure out how to do it. I was not trained. I was not in shape. I was a couch potato. It made it a little bit harder, but I did it. Packing. Packing is extremely important, especially on a long distance hike, because you only want to bring the things that you absolutely need, and you don't want to bring anything you don't need because it's unnecessary weight, and weight makes your hike much more difficult. So I was a little overzealous. I started packing 6 months before my trip. And every time I would find this cool little gadget, I would throw it on the bed in our guest room. And then, you know, like the week before my hike, I had to go through and pick out, okay, what are the things I'm actually going to bring and what am I not going to bring? I did keep my packing list. It's something I'm happy to share if people are interested. Also happy to talk with you at the end of this talk if you have questions about that. Brian and I together have hiked numerous long distance hikes at this point, so I feel pretty comfortable in offering you any suggestions I have. But again, I'm not an expert. I can just tell you what I know from my own experience. Reservations. So reservations are interesting because with the Camino especially, because the Camino is considered a spiritual route. There is this sense that you should not make reservations and that you should just show up in a town and have faith that there will be room at the inn, kind of the way Jesus and his family had to do things. So that's super cool, but I was a little nervous because I was going to a country by myself that I'd never been to before. I didn't really speak the language. So I wasn't super confident in that faithful plan at the time. So I did make a reservation for the first night. I found this great little hostel that was actually in Spain, right over the border in Spain. And I reached out to them and I told them, I'd like to make a reservation. They would give you a place to sleep, they'd give you dinner, and in the morning they would drive you over the border into France, drop you off in Saint-Jean, and you could start your Camino then. But the Camino is an extremely simple place. It's very simple compared to what we're used to here. And I learned that very early on. When I emailed them, the guy responded to me with this picture. It's a picture of his head, because I asked him, I was like, how am I supposed to find you at the train station? And he sent me a picture of his head with a finger pointing to a park bench. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to find this specific park bench outside of the train station. No names, no phone numbers, nothing exchanged. Sure enough, I did find him. I think his name was Esteban, and he and his wife were wonderful people, and they were an excellent start to my Camino. Now, they are no longer in business. They retired. However, there are lots of services, even more now than there were before, to help you get started on your journey. I think I flew into Madrid, and then I took a train somewhere. I'll have to look at specifics if you're interested. So I had read a lot about the Camino before I went, and I had read that the Camino pushed you both physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I was told that the Camino has the power to break down and rebuild the person from the inside out. I didn't necessarily believe that. I thought that was just a bunch of new age hype to get people excited about the Camino, but I actually experienced this exactly as it was described to me in the things that I read. First, it starts with your body. When you start hiking numerous miles a day, especially if you're not used to hiking a lot, it's very hard on your body. Things start breaking down. You get blisters, you get chafing, everything hurts. Everything hurts. You walk for miles every day and you're in so much pain. You didn't even know it was possible to have that much pain without actually being injured. But at some point, and it varies for everybody, at some point, your body starts to understand what you're doing, and suddenly you're just in line and it gets what's going on, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I can do this. I can put on the long miles and I don't feel it as much anymore, and everything's really good. It's just everything's clicking, everything's working. That's when your mind starts playing tricks on you, and your mind is the hardest part to overcome. That's when your brain's like, oh my God, what am I doing here? I'm never going to make it. Who am I to think I could do this? That's when all that negative talk comes into play. But just like your body, if you continue on, something happens with your mind and it starts to calm. I experienced so much garbage in my head the first few days. Like I was thinking about all these things. You're hiking all day. It's all you have plenty of time to think. All these things going through my head. And then at some point, everything just got quiet and peaceful. And I was not at the time a meditator, so I had never experienced that before. And that, when your mind and your body are in check, that's when you really start to do deep soul searching. And a lot of long distance hikers can attest to this. This is when your mind, body, and soul start asking very deep questions like, who am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? What good am I doing in the world? These are very important questions, and those questions, I will tell you, persist. So it's a very amazing and empowering experience for people who have this. Okay, so backing out, let's go through what an average day is on the Camino. If you're going to hike the Camino, this is what most people experience. So first thing is you wake up fairly early in the morning, usually around 6 a.m., but it could be later, could be earlier. It depends on how much hiking you plan on doing that day and how healthy you are in the morning. If you had a really hard day the day before, you might need some extra sleep. You never know. A lot of people start before the sun even comes up though. So you get up super early. First thing you need to do is eat. Eating is extremely important on a long distance hike. You need a lot of calories to sustain yourself. I think I read that the average long distance hiker is it like 16 to 18,000 calories a day or something ridiculous? I can't remember, so I won't quote it now. It's a lot. It's a lot. You could not possibly eat as much as you're burning. So a lot of people who do long distance hiking experience something called hiker hunger. It's when you reach a calorie deficit that is so high that no matter what you eat, you always feel hungry. So what I would recommend, eat a lot, eat all the time, and don't even worry about it. So lots of amazing food on the Camino. This was one of my favorite parts, was experiencing the culture of the country. On the right, on the top right, that is called tortilla. That is a very popular dish. It's made with egg and potato. It's so good. Café con leche is coffee with cream. People drink a lot of that. Also found out that sometimes you ask for café con leche, you will get a double shot of espresso. So you'll get extra caffeine sometimes. But usually breakfast is very simple on the Camino. These are things you can order, but usually you have a piece of toast with a little bit of butter, if you're lucky, a little bit of jelly, and then you're on your way. It's not a lot of food to start out. Also, I had freshly squeezed orange juice every single morning. I think it was just that time of year, but that woman on the bottom right was making fresh orange juice for me. And then you start hiking. This is the majority of your day, is just walking across the country and taking in the scenery and the culture. We saw so many things along the way. It's hard to see in this picture, but this was a double rainbow that we woke up to one morning. But you see lots of things. There's amazing architecture. The Romans were all over Spain, so their remnants are still there. You see lots of bridges and architecture that still remains today. So we saw a lot of that. There are big cities that you walk through, like Leon, Pamplona is kind of big, Astea, there's some larger cities there, Burgos, but there are also very small towns. This I would call a trail town. That's something that you hear on the Appalachian Trail. Trail towns are towns that are there specifically because of the trail. This was at the top of a mountain, and the buildings you see in this picture are all that are there. There's a tiny little restaurant, there's a place to sleep, a little supermercado, and that's about it. And a church, there's always a church. So lots of small towns along the way. So then you have to eat second breakfast. As I said, food is extremely important. I'm really happy in this picture because I am eating a chocolate stuffed croissant. Amazing. And then on the right, my hiking partner is eating something very common. It's a ham and cheese sandwich, jamón y queso. Lots of fun. You'll eat a major meal about 5 times a day. Sometimes we would eat an entire pizza by ourselves with a half a gallon of ice cream as one of those 5 meals. You're going to eat a lot. The red chairs. So the chairs, I love seeing these red chairs because when you're hiking on the Camino, you're tired, you're sweating, you're hungry, you're thirsty, and you look off in the distance and you see these bright red shiny chairs. Sometimes they're blue and sometimes they're green, but they all say the same thing: rest and food and drink. And so everybody runs when they see those. This was just one of the stops along the way. They have cafes all along the way, or bars. They call them bars, but they're cafes. And you could just sit outside with your Camino friends, the people you meet along the way, and you just eat and drink and enjoy their time together. There were lots of wheat fields. This was my friend Stephen and I. We jumped in the wheat fields and pretended we were swimming in them. You walk through many, many wheat fields. You walk through many vineyards between the cities. Beautiful country. The people in Spain are so amazing. Along the Camino, there is so much respect for the Camino and for pilgrims. And the locals, you have to think about it from the locals' perspective. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of strangers walk through their yards every single year, and yet they still have so much reverence for this pilgrimage. This was an old man that I passed. He was trimming his flower bushes, and he called me over and he gave me some flowers and a little walnut. And he asked me in Spanish if when I got to Santiago, I would say a prayer in his name. And I said, of course. But it was really funny because I saw lots of other women with flowers. So I think he just asked every woman that walked by if they would pray for him, which I thought was really cool. But the people are just very respectful. Most people are very respectful of the Camino and of the people who are hiking the Camino. And a lot of them themselves have hiked the Camino. This is one of the things that I think is so powerful about the Camino that I can't emphasize enough. there is a loving, supportive community spirit about the Camino in a way that I have not seen anywhere else in my life. And I will give you some examples of kindness between strangers like I've never seen. But even the graffiti was positive, like, you can do it, don't stop, keep going. And I'm like, this is so amazing. And then, of course, because you're in Spain, you go to church. Now, even if you're not a religious person, I will tell you the churches are a wonderful place to stop and rest. Again, people have a lot of respect for pilgrims and for the pilgrimage, as long as you're respectful that you are in their space and you're being respectful and not obnoxious. There are so many churches and amazing cathedrals. They're a wonderful place to stop. They're cool inside. They don't care that you stink and that you're carrying all your gear on your back. They will welcome you in. It's a great place to sit quietly, meditate, pray, whatever your thing is, to collect yourself. The architecture is absolutely astounding. So if you're interested in architecture, you're going to see just amazing things along the way. This was the cathedral in Burgos. This is considered the most beautiful cathedral on the Camino, and I couldn't agree more. It's also massive. So I highly recommend, if you can take a day off in Burgos. I loved Burgos, just to explore it, do a tour inside of Burgos. But they had, I forget how many, time is passing, 20 some chapels within the cathedral. It's massive, and every chapel was designed by a different architect or engineer or artist, so you could see the spirit of what they were building change over the centuries in each of the chapels. So it's really, there's a lot of history, a lot of culture there. And then you walk more. It's just a lot of walking. This is typical of what you will see on the Camino. A lot of people worry about getting lost. You're not going to get lost on the Camino. It's usually pretty easy to see the trail. It's well marked in most of the towns. They get paid really good money to mark them, so there are markers in a lot of places. But even if you get lost, there were a couple of times I didn't know where to go. And honestly, you just look at a local and they point, because they can tell who you are and why you're there, and they just tell you where to go. So it was never a big deal. I never felt scared. There was one time I didn't know which way to go, and I just waited for other pilgrims to show up, and collectively we decided where to go next. So it's really not something to be concerned about. I love this picture. This was one of our many breaks. You have to break a lot, and there are cafes and bars along the way, but sometimes you'll walk for several miles and there won't be something. So you just drop your pack on the side of the road or the side of the path, and you get some water and hang out. I love this picture though, because you've got wheat fields on the left and vineyards on the right, and that's pretty much all we did across Spain was eat bread and drink wine. Wine is very cheap in Spain. A lot of times you'll get a bottle of wine for free along with your meal. And it's because the vineyards are everywhere. You will walk through miles and miles of vineyards. And then you go to a bar. As I said, the bars are everywhere. They're really cafes or restaurants. They're very cute. I love going into these because this is when you really get to experience the local culture. So this was my friends and I that were hiking. We stopped at this place, and this man did something really sweet. I'm trying to remember what it was. He was giving all the women a necklace that had been blessed by the Pope, and he was handing them out to people. So it's just really wonderful. And as I said, sometimes you just have to stop anywhere. This one stop with my Camino friends, we had beer and peanuts, and that's pretty much all you need. That picture on the top right, some of the local business owners will paint right on the road bar with an arrow, and you will never see people hike faster than when they see that. They get so excited. Animals. If you like animals, you'll love the Camino because they're all over, both domestic and feral and livestock. They're everywhere, and you will see a lot of feral animals. The cats and the dog. The dog was a herder, so he was a working dog. The cats were feral. You will see them all along the way. Usually they just want food. They're super sweet. Everybody was calling me Snow White because the animals always came up to me. But even the horses are just so loving and sweet. Like, they're used to a lot of people handling them. So it was just, I love animals. So it was just heaven for me. So this picture, I put this picture in my presentation when I first started giving this talk 5 years ago. And I couldn't articulate for the longest time why it was so important to me. And it finally hit me years later. And I will tell you, the experiences that you have on the Camino will take you years to process, but that's a whole other talk I have. The reason I love this photo is because this was day 7 of my Camino, and I was having very serious doubts that I was going to be able to finish. I was really struggling. I was in a lot of pain. I couldn't keep up, and I was feeling pretty miserable. And I was looking down at the ground. I had my hiking poles, and I had a headache, and I was sweating, and I was tired, and I was feeling sorry for myself. And I looked up, and in the distance, the sun, the clouds parted, and the sun was highlighting my destination in the background. And I realized in that moment I was going to make it, and it was the most wonderful feeling. And I realized that on the Camino, every morning that you wake up, you have purpose, you have a goal, and it might not be a life-changing epic goal, but your goal is to get to some place on a map that you've never been to before, and you're going to work really hard all day to get there. But when you get there, you feel like a rock star, and you feel so wonderful about yourself. That's a very powerful experience. A lot of times we just run through life and we're just checking things off the list and doing our chores. But when you feel like you have a really big goal and you work hard and you achieve that goal every single day, it's a very strong, wonderful feeling. Oh, and I will tell you, again, this is another talk I give, not for today, but I will tell you one thing that is extremely important, that when you come back from a long distance hike like this, you need to find your purpose again. And your purpose in life might be different once you come back. Again, that's a whole other story that I'm happy to talk about another time if you'll have me back. Then you got to find a bed. So you've hiked all day, you're tired, and you need to find somewhere to sleep. So some people, like I said, make reservations. Some people don't. At the beginning of the Camino, like the first half of it from France to partway through Spain, I didn't make reservations. I just showed up, and sometimes I got turned away, but eventually I would find a place that had room. I will tell you that closer to the end of the Camino, closer to Santiago, we were making reservations a day ahead of time because places were booking up quickly. So let's talk about accommodations. They can vary wildly. This was my favorite place to stay, which is shocking. It was in an attic, and that window was wide open. There were no actual windows that led out to the roof. And it was just 3 mattresses on the floor that me and my 2 favorite hiking partners stayed there. But that was my favorite place to stay because there were only 3 of us in a room and we all knew each other. And that was actually very unusual. So normally when you're on the Camino, you sleep in bunk beds, and usually it can vary. Your room can be anywhere from 10 people to 500 people. It really depends. The first stop in Roncesvalles has about 500 people, but they put up partitions. So you're just really in with like 4 people. Like in that top picture, I have my 2 Camino partners, they're sleeping right there, but like there were partitions on both sides. So it's a little cozy, but it does not protect you from the snoring and the farting and all the other things you hear from other people around you. So you do have to learn to sleep with other people around. I did not sleep at all for the first 3 nights. And then the 4th night, I just passed out from sheer exhaustion, and I never had a problem sleeping again. You do become very used to it, and you actually come to like it, shockingly. You enjoy waking up with your happy friends and every morning. It's really nice. So in addition to finding a bed at the end of the day, you also have to shower and do laundry. You've been hiking all day, and you have to do laundry because you're carrying everything on your back, most likely. Therefore, you only have like 2 outfits. You've got one that's in your pack for an emergency, and then the one you're wearing. So you have to wash the one you're wearing and then put the other one that was in your pack on you. So some places have washers and dryers. They will charge you more for the washer and dryer than they will charge you for the bed. And if that happens, you will happily pay for it, because if you don't use the washer and dryer, in some places you don't have an option and you have to hand wash your clothes. So you want to have a little bit of detergent with you or a bar of soap or something. This day, I found this really dirty sink. It was cold, it was rainy, and it was my only option. So I was outside in the cold washing my laundry by hand, and then I had to hang it up by my bunk bed and hope that it dried by the next day. If it doesn't dry, you pin it to your back of your pack and you carry it with you the next day, and it dries in the air. And then you have to find dinner, because even though you've been eating all day, you're still hungry. Dinner's great. Dinner's wonderful. You get to spend it with all of your Camino friends. You've met people from all over the world all day and you're running into each other. They're coming and going, you're passing each other. Sometimes you stop at the same places, but at night, it's when you really get to relax. You've showered, you're feeling good. Sometimes they sit family style. This is in Roncesvalles, the picture with the long table. I love that picture because I got to know every single person at that table at the beginning of my Camino. I know all of those people. And then sometimes there are no, the hostels might not have anything for you to eat or anywhere for you to eat. And there might not even be a restaurant in town. So if that's the case, you just go to the supermercado, you pick up some things, and sometimes they have a small kitchen, you can make stuff. And sometimes they might not have kitchens, in which case you just get bread and cheese and queso and chorizo and make yourself a little sandwich. So that picture in the bottom left, that was my friends. We just went to the supermarket. Everybody picked up some random things, threw it on a table, and we all had a wonderful meal together. And then you visit with your trail family. This is the most special part of the Camino, at least for me. The people that I met are people who I will never forget. This was my main hiking family. They call them tramilies or trail families. Trail families are a very important part of long distance hiking. The people you spend time with dictate the type of experience you're going to have. So it's important that you spend time with people who make you feel good, who inspire you, who are good people. But this happens very organically. You don't have to think about it. You will naturally start clicking with people. You'll start walking more together and you will find your people. If you want to walk in solitude and walk in silence, that's acceptable too. A lot of people do that and it's totally okay. At this stop, there was a food truck that was parked in the middle of a vineyard and we stopped and I think we had like wine with Coke, which apparently is like a cheaper version of rum and Coke that they like to do in Spain. This is another picture of a small town where we stopped and hung out with our trail family. I put this picture in because I wanted to show you and remind me to tell you that there are a lot of ways you can hike the Camino. If you remember, I said people of all abilities can hike the Camino. These people were here in a tour group. So what that meant was that they hiked from place to place, but there was a bus that shipped their stuff from place to place. And if for some reason they got injured or they just got tired and didn't want to walk anymore, the bus would come and pick them up and take them to their stopping point for the day. Now, I will tell you, as someone who walked the full 500 miles with everything on my back, I did not think it was fair that these people were getting the same credit for hiking the Camino as I was. But I spent some time with them, I got to know them, and eventually I got over myself and I realized everybody should be able to enjoy the Camino. And if a tour group or a hiking group is what you need, that's exactly what you should do. So these people always smelled really good. Their clothes were nice. They always had perfect hair because they got to bring all that extra stuff that I wasn't able to bring. So it's definitely probably a better way to hike. Okay, and then you journal. I highly recommend journaling. I did not think I was a journaler, and the only reason I kept a blog was because I promised my mom I'd give her proof of life at the end of every day. But I actually found journaling to be a critical part of my experience. It gave me time to sit down and think about what I was going through every single night, and I came to really enjoy that. And spoiler alert, I ended up turning it into a book and now I have this memory for the rest of my life. And as I start forgetting things, which is happening now that it's been several years, I can go back and read it and relive it all over again. So journal, journal, journal. And then you go to bed fairly early, maybe around 9 o'clock. They call it hiker midnight. It's when everybody goes to bed super early. My first night when we walked over the Pyrenees Mountains, everybody was asleep and in bed by 7 p.m. So it all depends on how tired you are. Okay, so let's jump into my personal experience that I went through. As I said, everybody's experience is different. So I want to give you a little bit of flavor. And the only way I could do that is to talk about my own experience. So the first day I was excited, naive, and soaking wet. It was raining. We were in Saint-Jean in France. It was an adorable little town. It smelled like French bread. It was amazing. Cobblestone roads everywhere. But the first thing we did was we went to the pharmacy. Pharmacies are like candy stores to pilgrims. You're always going to need a pharmacy. You're always going to want things, and they're everywhere. So don't worry about it. You don't have to carry like an excessive emergency kit. There's always something around for you. And they always know what pilgrims need. Sometimes you walk in and they're like, here's a blister kit because that's probably what you need. And we stopped at the grocery store. I always had snacks on me. It was usually chorizo and cheese. And then we sorry. And then we also went to the pilgrim's office. There's a pilgrim's office there where you begin your Camino and you pick up an accordion style booklet, which is your Camino passport. And every time you stop somewhere, you get a stamp in it. That passport is proof that you are a pilgrim hiking the Camino, and you need that at the end when you go to the office in Santiago if you want to get your Compostela, which is a certificate of completion. So we started by hiking over the Pyrenees Mountains. It was 40 degrees. It was raining. We were cold, but we were sweating. And it was so foggy. The 2 days that I was in the Pyrenees, this was actually the only picture I got of the entire time because you couldn't see anything in front of you. I found the Pyrenees to be relentless and difficult. However, if you live in New England and you have hiked the Whites, you are prepared for anything. People in New England have the advantage of having some of the toughest hiking right in their backyards. So don't worry, you got this. And then at some point we passed over the Pyrenees Mountains and into Spain. I don't know when that happened. There was no sign that was like, welcome to España. But at this point we celebrated here. These were two of my Camino friends that I met along the way. And we congratulated each other here. We were like, this looks like Spain. I think this is Spain, but we really had no idea. We were just guessing. Okay, day 3. Families are formed and bodies are broken. Day 3 is so critical. This is when everybody starts to work hard and play hard. By day 3, when you wake up in the morning, you start hurting. You start your hike already hurting. You're sore, everything hurts. Like I said, I got to a point where, and I don't know if this happens for everyone, I didn't want to stop walking because as soon as I would stop walking, my entire body would scream in pain. So I just wanted to keep walking so I didn't feel it. But that's actually really bad for you. So you do need to take breaks. But look at us. We're all smiling. We're having a blast. We're drinking sangria. We're drinking cerveza. We're meeting each other. We're from all over the world. Oh my God. And I love these people so much. I've stayed in touch with every single one of them, and they are just near and dear to my heart. Amazing. Yeah, so in the bottom right picture, this is something you'll commonly do at night before you go to bed. You look at your map and you try to estimate based on the condition of your body and the terrain for the next day, how far you think you want to go. And you'll see there's a calculator right there and it says 17.9. That's probably in kilometers. We were definitely not walking 17.9 miles in our first week. But that's something you're going to have to do on a regular, well, you're not going to have to, but that's something, if you're a planner, you like to do. We did stop in Pamplona, which is where they have the running of the bulls every year. This is the 3rd largest bull ring in the world. It was not open, but we stopped and looked at it. It was a pretty cool landmark. And then eventually we got to this point. This was at the top of a hill. It was a bit of a climb to get to the top, but my friend and I climbed up that hill first thing in the morning so we could watch the sunrise over the valley. And that was a really special experience. And then we had to get pictures of us jumping in the air, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you've got a 16-pound pack on your back, that's actually pretty impressive. Okay, day 7. I decide to walk alone. I didn't decide to walk alone. I didn't really have a choice. So I think I mentioned already when I showed you that one picture with the town in the distance, that was day 7. And I didn't think I was going to make it. And I did make it, of course. But at that point in time, I was hiking with my friend, Melissa. She was from Texas. We met. It's a really cool story how we met, actually. But we were hiking from the very first day together. Melissa did not. Melissa had a timeline for how much time she could spend on the Camino. So she was walking hard and fast. I had 2 months, so I was not in a hurry. And I'm also very small and I have a hard time keeping up with people with regular sized legs. So I struggled to keep up with her. And I realized by day 7 that I was not enjoying myself and I was afraid I was going to injure myself. There's a very important saying on the Camino. There are many sayings on the Camino, but one that really resonated with me on day 7 was hike your own hike. You must hike at your own pace, even if it means not staying with the people that you've met along the way, even if it means not hiking together with the person you came with. That's what you need to do to make sure that everyone has a good journey. We saw a couple, it was a couple and their 2 daughters later in the Camino. They started out hiking together and they found that the daughter and the mother were hiking together for the first part of the Camino, and then the husband and the other daughter met them and they were all going to hike together. They decided to continue to hike separate. The husband and the one daughter who just arrived hiked separate from the mother and daughter who had been hiking for a month already, because they weren't enjoying it together, because they were walking at different speeds. They were at differing levels of conditioning. So they all decided they would just meet at the end of the day together. If that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. Be okay with that. So I had to say goodbye to my friend Melissa. And at that point, we had been together through so much stuff in 7 days. We felt like sisters. You really bond with your family. So I had to say goodbye to her. But it wasn't a bad story, because then I ran into these 2 awesome guys who I met in France on the first day and saw every subsequent night at dinner. I ran into them and I was like, do you guys want to hike together? And they were like, sure, absolutely. And so I developed a new Camino family. Camino families come and go. They're all special to you, though. On the left here, there is something called a wine fountain. It's at a monastery. They actually have free wine for as long as it lasts. And so I had brought a little sippy cup specifically for that event, and I filled it with wine. And then I attached it to my pack so I could drink wine the rest of the day. It was pretty cool. And then we kept walking together. Now, I put this photo on the cover of my first book because I loved it so much. I was still struggling, even though Melissa and I weren't walking together anymore, and the guys were very accommodating to my slow pace. I was really struggling at one point, and I started having this very serious pain in my leg, and I was like, oh my God, I can't walk anymore. So I had to stop walking. And my friend Steven walked up over the hill, and he came back and he was like, Theresa, you have to see this. And I was like, no way. If it's not on the way to my bed, I'm not going. I don't have any extra steps to give today. And he was like, please trust me. So we walked off the Camino path up over this hill, and we saw this poppy field as far as the eye could see in almost all directions. And it was absolutely amazing. And we frolicked in it. We threw our packs down. We all lay down. We took a nap. We slept there for like an hour before we continued on. But my point in telling that story is you never quite know how things are going to play. It might seem like a really hard time, but it could lead to really beautiful moments. And there are lots of beautiful moments on the Camino. There are so many silly stops. I love this photo. Again, I know all these people. I have mostly stayed in touch with them. They're from all over the world, all different age groups. The oldest person in this picture is almost 80 years old. The youngest person was 15. Just a really great time meeting people. I, of course, got a blister. I started getting blisters. It took me a while to figure out what I was doing wrong, but my one Camino friend, Steven, was a paramedic, so he actually helped teach me how to take care of my feet. There are lots of very strong opinions about how to take care of blisters and how to avoid blisters. People have very strong feelings about it. I have strong feelings about it, but I'm not going to preach on any of that today. You guys can do the research and make your own strong opinions about it. By day 11, I walked my first 30-kilometer day, which is about 18 miles. That was really exciting because at the beginning, I was only able to walk like 6 miles. So within less than 2 weeks, I was more than doubling my progress, and I was really starting to feel good. This is when my body was starting to play along. I still had blisters, but my body was starting to feel better, and my mind was in check. So that was a really cool day. And I just put this in here because there's so many unique experiences in Spain from what we usually see here in the US. We were walking through a vineyard and we literally got pushed off the road by hundreds of sheep. And then I don't know if we'll get to it, but there's like this lazy donkey way in the back. And he had this little retired puppy over here that like stood between us and the sheep. She was so good at her job. But like I said, lots of animals on the Camino. I'm going kind of quickly because we have a lot to get through, so I apologize if I'm going too quickly. I want to leave time for questions. Okay, as I said, you feel like a rock star every day when you accomplish something, and even if it's a small thing, you celebrate. There was this big hill that we had to climb. If you notice, everything behind me is totally flat, but they put the Camino up over this massive hill that was in the middle of nowhere. And it took us like an hour to climb the top. But when we got up there, I was like, yeah. But then we looked on the other side and we saw the meseta, the true meseta. Meseta means plateau, and that is exactly what it is. You can look as far as the eye can see, and all you see is the meseta. It is this large swath of land across Spain, and it's nothing but fields. A lot of people skip the meseta because it's very difficult. There is no protection from the sun. There's little water. There's no food, and it's mind-numbingly boring. But I will tell you that I had massive life-changing revelations that I couldn't possibly emphasize in this meeting while I was walking across the meseta. So I would say if you're looking for that soul searching, you need the meseta. Happy to talk more about that as well. Day 20, I hit rock bottom. I will not go into too much detail, but several things were happening for me. So my mind and body were in check and I was feeling really great, but I was still having problems with my feet. I was still having blisters. And I woke up in the morning. And I knew my body was telling me you need a day off, but I was like, I'm having a good time. You get very addicted to the mileage. You're like, oh, I hiked 20 miles the day before. I'm going to hike 20 miles tomorrow. And I'm going to hike 20 miles the next day. It's not how that works. So I should have stopped. I didn't. I got halfway through my walk. I took my shoes off and I had on both of my feet massive blisters between my big toe, and it wrapped all the way around to the ball of my foot. They were massive and they were so painful. But I tell this story because this is really the spirit of the Camino. My Camino partner, who's sitting there with the Nike shirt on, we hiked 250 miles together. And he's German. He spoke a little bit of English. The other man here was German. The other man came up and he saw that my feet were propped up and he looked at it and he said to my friend in German, he was like, she needs aloe. And I was like, that's great. And I was like, I don't have aloe. And he pulled a plant out of his pocket and he was like, I have an aloe plant. So I couldn't understand them. They were speaking German, but all of a sudden they went to work working on my feet. And I just couldn't help but sit there and think how amazing it was that these two people who owe me absolutely nothing were working so hard to make me feel better and to help me. Now, what he did, I won't go into detail, was actually not helpful at all and was actually really bad for my feet, but it was wildly creative and extremely sweet. So I gave him a big hug and I thanked him in German and he went along his way. So that night, I stopped in, forget what town I was in, Carrion de los Condes. I had to see a doctor and I saw the doctor and he was like, you can't walk for 3 days. Your feet are going to be infected. And once your feet are infected, you cannot walk on them. So he was like, you have to stop walking for 3 days. And I was devastated. I was crushed. I'd been walking with my partner for how many miles and I had to say goodbye to him and I didn't think I'd ever see him again. All my other Camino friends, I had to say goodbye to them. It's a very tough decision. And they have to hike their own hike. So I knew they were going to go on without me. Well, if that wasn't enough, that night I ended up with a terrible stomach bug. You pass around a lot of germs on the Camino, and a lot of people got sick. The gentleman in the bed next to me was also sick. And the next morning, when I woke up, I was very sick. I couldn't move. My friends moved on without me. Fortunately, I was staying in a convent. Now, most hostels, they'll kick you out first thing in the morning, regardless of your condition, because they have to prepare for the next wave of pilgrims coming in. And I was really sick and I was so injured when I got into town the night before. I didn't even know what town I was in. I had no plan. All my friends moved on without me. I had no idea what I was going to do. But that was where there was more love and kindness like I've never seen. That guy on the right with the glasses, his name is Marco. I had met him the night before, otherwise didn't know him. Marco stayed behind and he went to the supermarket and he got drinks and food for us. And he would wake us every hour or so and have us drink some fluids. And at one point he woke me up and he was like, are you strong enough to walk? And I said, yeah. And he was like, I need you to get your things. And I was like, oh my God, they're kicking me out. And I was like stuffing stuff in my backpack. And I had severe food poisoning of some kind. So I couldn't be far from the bathroom. And I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to go. Marco grabbed my stuff and started walking away, and he said, follow me. And I was like, I can carry my own things, trying to be super independent. And he was like, just follow me. He made reservations at a hotel for both the other gentleman and I. And when I got there, he had it all set up with food and drinks and a map. And he circled all the places that I would need: the ATM, the doctor, the bus station. And he basically gave me a place to stay so that I could recover for the day. And that was hands down the most kindest act of generosity I've ever received from a stranger. I was in so much need at that point, and someone who did not know me, had no reason to stay behind, took care of me and made sure I was safe and that I could get well in a good place. And it was a wonderful experience. I can't explain what that feels like. So, and by the way, my hiking partner who I walked with for hundreds of miles, he just went to the next big city and waited for me. So I saw him again and we got to continue walking together. It was just so wonderful. So day 24, I found myself, I found my groove. I was feeling good. I had the blister issue figured out. I was thoroughly enjoying my trip. This is the Cruz de Ferro. Notice there are millions of rocks. People come from all over the world to leave their rocks here. People carry their rocks from the start of the Camino and they drop it there. And the rock is meant to represent the weight of your sins or your prayers. And it's a very powerful moment when you can leave the rock there and continue your journey without that weight on you anymore. So it's both very, very spiritual, very proverbial, very literal, because you actually are carrying that weight. Camino angels are amazing aspects of the Camino. There are Camino angels all along the way, also called trail angels. These are people who have the goodness of their heart just make sure pilgrims have whatever they need at the time for free. They offer food, clothing, water, shelter, a massage, whatever it is that you need. This gentleman on the right who's not wearing a shirt, he is homeless. He had been homeless for 6 years. He hand built this little kiosk here, and he would just stuff it full of food and drinks, and he would just feed the pilgrims along the way. And he also built, we were in this massive dirt field, so he built this little wooden structure and put blankets down so we had somewhere to sit. And that was his dog there. But he said the dog is not mine. The dog is free. We exchanged, what did he say? He exchanged food for love or something like that. It was really sweet. So on day 28, my husband joined me. I hiked almost an entire month by myself, but Brian and I wanted to hike the last part of the Camino together. The last 60 miles of the Camino, which is the last 100 kilometers from Seria to Santiago, that's considered the official Camino. And that's what you need to hike to get credit for hiking the Camino. That's also where it gets super popular. That's the part that Brian was going to hike with me. Although I'm such a slow walker, he met me way back in Ponferrada, and I think he got to walk like a full 100 miles with me. But it was really cool because his first day there, he had to condition his body just like anybody else. So while my body was all great and I was like in a really great mood and I could really pack on the miles, he was struggling because it was his first day. And I just happened to find a sign on the side of the road, and it said, it was hand painted, "Do you need horses?" And I was like, yes, I do need horses. And so I called the number and I asked the gentleman if he had horses, and he was like, yeah, walk 2 hours and you'll find me. And I knew the Camino is very simple, no names, no phone numbers, nothing. And we walked for 2 hours, and eventually we found this guy with horses. And we and several other pilgrims got on those horses, and we got to ride them up and over the next mountain on horses, which was really an incredible experience. It was a fun, unique experience for me after hiking for a whole month. And it was just the break my husband needed to break him into the hiking experience again. These are some of the mile markers you'll see. They're all over. I would not pay attention to the mileage. Those both say 50 kilometers, and they were nowhere near each other. So the numbers are wildly inaccurate. But these are just some examples. You'll see the yellow shells, the yellow arrows. Right above my husband's head is the Camino shell. I actually have it tattooed on my arm now. You probably can't see it, but I have the Camino shell on my arm. Yeah, so you'll see lots of those. Day 38, we finally made it to Santiago. At this point, I had a whole new hiking family because families are always transitioning. And the night before, we had sangria. Again, I still keep in touch with all of these people. They're from New Zealand, South Africa, Canada. I always forget where he is. Somewhere else. Amsterdam, maybe? Amsterdam. But anyway, you have to get a picture in front of the Santiago de Compostela sign. I've seen pictures of it where it's covered in stickers. People have a tendency to put stickers on it, but I think they clear it off every few years. So it depends on what year you get there and whether, when we got there, it was brand spanking new. So it looked really nice. But you take a picture of the sign and then you move into Santiago. So I will paint the picture of Santiago for you. When you reach Santiago de Compostela, you are in this plaza surrounded by 4 buildings, and the cathedral is on one side. Now, when we arrived, it was going through massive restoration. So that's why you see all the scaffolding and you see the big photo in front of it. I will tell you that did not detract from the excitement whatsoever. Santiago is a sea of celebration all day, every day. People are coming from all over the world. And a lot of times when they arrive in front of Santiago, they have just accomplished one of the most difficult things they've ever done in their life. So it is a town celebrating, in celebration, 24 hours a day. It's really quite extraordinary. When we got there, we all got pictures in front of it. And the guy who's on his knee, he actually got on his knee and proposed to his girlfriend. He carried a ring for 500 miles and he never told any of us. So it was just, oh my God, the tears. Everybody was crying. But it was like everyone I met along the Camino, they all somehow managed to meet up on the same day in Santiago. So I was running into people who I hadn't seen in like 30 days and everybody was crying and kissing. And it was just, oh, it was just big hugs. It was such an amazing experience. And then, of course, you have to get your Compostela. So you stand in a really long line. And when you get there, there are lots of people at a desk, and they'll call you over and they ask you, where did you start your hike? And they ask you why you hike. And once you give them those answers and you show them your Camino passport, they fill out and they give you 2 certificates. One is a certificate of completion and the other one's like a certificate of mileage. So it says that I hiked 775 kilometers. So that was pretty cool. Okay, I'm going to show you this. Hopefully this works. Yes. So one of the things people love to do when they get to Santiago is see the Barufamero swing. A Barufamero is a massive incense ball. It is larger than my body. I don't think I have a picture of it in this presentation, but there's a replica and I got a picture of me next to it and I am the exact same size of it. It's huge. It takes 8 grown men to swing it and they swing it over the cathedral. Oh no, did it stop? There we go. It's really funny because you'll see all these people with pictures and photos the whole time. They're like, no pictures, no photos, but everybody's like, we just traveled 500 miles to see this. We will have a record of it. So they don't actually mind if you take pictures and video. But these 8 men come out and they swing the Barufamero. Now the story is the Barufamero today is a very special experience for a lot of people. They hike the Camino. This is the culmination of everything they've been through, right? This is the very end, and it's this very spiritual moment, and a lot of people are crying, and it's very powerful. People are praying. I do think the actual story of it is quite funny. The reason they swing the Barufamero and why it's so big is because 1,000 years ago, when people would hike the Camino and make pilgrimage from all over the world, they would come and bed down in the cathedral on the floor, but they smelled so bad that they would swing the incense to mask the smell. So I think that's a pretty funny story because it has definitely evolved into something a little more modern and it's very special for people. But it really is an amazing experience. We're at 8:02. I'm almost done, but I will let this go for a couple minutes just so you can see it, because I know this is something that a lot of people want to see. Oh, another thing. The Barufamero, at least this was true when I hiked, the Barufamero only swings definitely on Fridays at Mass. I think it's like the 10 a.m. Mass. You can look that up. But the Catholic Church is always willing to capitalize on desperate tourists. So for the low price of 500 euros, they would be more than happy to swing the Barufamero any day of the week. So we just kept going to masses. I went to 3 different masses to see it swing in the hopes that somebody paid 500 euros to see it. And then the 3rd time we actually got to see it swing. Okay. All right, so I know we're pretty much at time here, but I do want to talk about something really important. I have a whole other presentation on this, and I ended up writing a whole 2nd book about this, which was not the plan, but I will tell you that if you hike the Camino or you have any other major life-changing journey like this, you do not come back the same person. And the return back can be very painful. And it took me years to fully unpack and process what happened to me. I did not realize how life-changing the Camino was for me. I thought I went on vacation, but I came back a different person, and it took years to understand that and to process it. But the immediate changes, the immediate difficulties I experienced, a lot of it had to do with the sudden lack of physical activity. Just as suddenly walking 20 miles a day is very hard on your mind and body, so is suddenly not walking 20 miles a day. I went from being outside in the sun, pumping endorphins, walking, being physically active, eating healthy foods, hanging out with people, to sitting in a desk with pumped in air conditioning and fluorescent lighting. And it was extremely difficult. I went into a full-on depression, gained a bunch of weight. Lots of things happened that I had to manage. I found myself very overwhelmed with the world. Suddenly everything moved very quickly. All of a sudden I felt like I had to make decisions and I had to do chores, and it all felt very meaningless compared to the soul searching that I was doing when I was on the Camino. So it was all very abrupt and very difficult to manage. But I will tell you, a lot of people experience this. If you are going through something like this, please reach out to me. I'm more than happy to be your advocate and supporter and help you through that, because I lived through it. I will tell you, you will come out a better person on the other end. My life is so extraordinarily different and better in so many wonderful and beautiful ways that I cannot possibly describe while we're here. I'm always thinking about what's next. That's one of the things. I am an avid traveler now. I am an adventurer. I am a public speaker. I am an author. I am a competitive aerialist, like Cirque du Soleil. People, you know, if you've seen like trapeze and hoops and silks, I do that now. None of those things were in the cards for me before the Camino. So it's completely changed who I am and how I live my life, the type of person I want to be, and the type of people I want to be around. All those things changed because of my hike on the Camino. I have since hiked the Portuguese Camino. So it's starting in Porto, I think near Porto, Portugal, and heading north into Spain. I travel all the time now. And as I said, I ended up writing a 2nd book that just focuses on what it's like to return from a life-changing adventure like this. So I have a lot of people to thank. I had so many people that supported me along the way that made this possible. My friends, my family, the amazing people who helped me while I was on the Camino, like the trail angels, they were all extremely supportive. As I said, I have 2 books now. They're available on Amazon. If you like them, give us 5 stars. Those little stars go a long way for unknowns like me. If you want to reach out to me, or you just want to chat about things, that's my email address. Also, my website is theresafersch.com. I'm pretty easy to find. More than happy to be your cheerleader or whatever it is you need to encourage you to do something that you're really passionate about. So that is my talk. Thank you so much. And now, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to stick around. I know we went a little bit over. Thank you.
So I want to say what an incredible presentation that you've made, Theresa. Not to mention, I'm sure this is something that you're very proud of, the whole transformation that you've made yourself. We've got a couple of cute comments in the comment section, but I think what I'll do is defer to people who have questions. If you just unmute yourself and ask your question, that would be 100% acceptable.
I have a quick question, if it's okay. So you went through this massive change and your husband wasn't there for most of the hike. How difficult was it for you with social relationships, not losing people and maintaining, like, how do you go on a hike like that, come back completely changed and maintain relationships that you had before that are important, that you can't just walk away from, like a spouse or a
Yeah.
boss or things like that?
That's an excellent question. And I love that you asked that. For me, my relationships were the biggest thing that changed for me. When I came back, I felt very disconnected from everyone, including my own husband. And it was very difficult. He and I both went on life-changing journeys. He hiked the entire Appalachian Trail. And when he came back, we were very distant, but then we found each other again. And then I went on my hike and we detached and found each other again. I will say you do need a strong foundation. I have talked to a lot of people who are like, oh, my spouse and I are struggling and I want to hike the Camino. And I'm like, you can do that, but I don't tell them this, but I'm like, you're not going to make it. Like, you need a strong foundation. It will make you rethink everything. You'll come back, your needs will be different. The way you communicate with people will be different. The needs will be different. And one of the things I struggled with was I had all of these friends who were totally making me happy before. And then I came home and I was no longer fulfilled by them. I felt like I couldn't connect with them. I felt like we didn't have anything in common. And I had to reevaluate, what do I need? What am I missing? And then I had to look for those things, either in the relationships I already have, or I had to cultivate new relationships. I had to reassess every single relationship in my life, including the one with my spouse, and determine, is that working for me? This new person that I am now, does this work for me? And I found that some relationships required extra love and care and attention. And I found other relationships were no longer worth my time. And I had to let go of those. But in terms of your question about what about the people that you need to stay, your family, I don't have answers, but I could tell you a couple of things that helped. One, prepare them for the fact that you're going to have a hard time coming back, and let them know, like, we're going to have to work to reconnect again. It's going to be a struggle, and just ask them to be loving and patient and accepting as you go through that. And two, recognize that if the relationship is important to you, you're going to have to put in extra work. And it might be sitting, and whatever that is, however that works for you, whether it's sitting down and talking and saying, what do we love about each other? Why are we important to each other? What do we gain from each other? What's important? It might be you need to have that very direct discussion and find ways to connect. So my husband and I looked for new ways to love each other and to engage with each other. And so we ended up taking on new hobbies together, new activities together, and we reconnected through those things. So does that answer your question? I think it's also helpful to recognize also, this was a hard lesson for me. Not all relationships do everything for you. So you're not going to get everything you need from one person or from even a group of people. So where I wasn't getting something that I needed in one relationship, I would find it somewhere else. Like my girlfriends, like, they're great for going out and having drinks, but like that deep thought and conversation and those deep talks that I wanted, I wasn't getting there. So I had to cultivate new relationships, and I have another group of people now, and they're the people I go to for that spiritual nurturing that I need.
I have a quick question. Thank you so much. I love this. And I'm a teacher. I'm a Spanish teacher. And I think you said, I noticed you went in March through June.
May through June.
May.
Yep.
Okay. So I have a lot of time off, but it's very specific. And so could you recommend the best times to go? And is it just crazy busy in the summer because that's when a lot of people have off?
Yeah, so there are two times that are most popular. September is the most popular time, which if you're a teacher, that's probably not when you would go, but September is the most popular because that's the best season in terms of weather, in terms of weather in the season. It's dry, it's not quite cold yet. So September tends to be the most popular. At least it was when I hiked it. And then the May, June timeframe is the second most popular. So that's not quite as busy. It's crazy busy in September. I imagine it's probably crazy busy in May, June now as well. But I would say go whenever you can and just be prepared for the weather conditions and how many people you think will be there. The May, June timeframe worked out really well for me that particular year because it only rained. I think I only got maybe 5 days of rain out of the 38. It was very cold the first couple of days. It was in the low 40s. And then the last 4 days that I hiked, it was over 100 degrees. So I was kind of right in that sweet spot.
I've got a quick question. This is Dana. Using the horses doesn't invalidate your trip?
That's a really good question. So there are purists out there. And actually I questioned that myself. Like when I would stay in hotels, I was like, am I really a pilgrim if I'm sleeping in a 5-star hotel? I would say, yes, you are absolutely a pilgrim. You are out there, you are working so hard. So even if you take a break every now and then, and God forbid, take a taxi cab, it's okay. It's okay. But yes,
it.
some people do feel very strongly about that. Absolutely.
You know, we've seen, I think, a rise in books and movies on this subject of sort of people leaving the trail. There's the Wild, Cheryl Strayed. There's the I can't think of the name of it, probably out 10 years ago, the kid who sort of went off grid in Alaska. Ultimately, he met his fate by eating something poisonous, probably. And
Into the Wild.
Into the Wild, thank you. And then even to a lesser degree, but certainly of the same ilk, the I'm conjuring up an image, but I'm blanking on the title, with Frances McDormand, Nomadland.
Okay.
Nomadland. Yep. So I think the common theme, or one of the themes, is this transformation. And what do you attribute most of it to? Is it something akin to what you would say is what meditation does? It sort of stills the mind and allows for sort of the infiltration of all the things that need to be in there. What do you think the mechanism is?
So I think that's a big part of it. I did a lot of reading on neuroplasticity when I returned because I felt my brain functioning different. I experienced time differently than I did before I hiked the Camino. You go through massive changes, physically, mentally. Your brain changes. Your brain actually rewires. And I think that has a lot to do with it. You talk about meditation. It's really interesting because I was never into meditation. I was like, I can't sit still, which I learned everybody goes through that. Everyone who meditates goes through that struggle of my mind won't quiet. That's because your brain is supposed to think. And that's natural. But I didn't realize I was going through a walking meditation, and I had trained my brain to quiet and slow. And yes, I think very much so something is happening in your brain. Something very different is happening in your brain. It is rewiring, it is changing the way that it functions. I think that's part of it, but it's not just that. The experiences that I had when I came back, I had the realization that I am in a position where I could live almost any kind of life I want. And so I had to ask myself, is this the life I want? Like this one right here, this is what I want of all the options out there. And so I had to question every major decision I made. So that's very transformational, that realization that the world is suddenly much bigger and more accessible than what you thought it was before. It opens your eyes to possibilities and opportunities. Like I was like, do I want to live in the United States? Like the sky's the limit now. So I think that's a component of it. I think also there is a great deal of getting to know yourself. When you do something incredibly strenuous, you you learn exactly who you are. There is no lying or denying about who you are and what you're capable of. You know your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know what you can do, and you know what you can't do. And that's very empowering. And that makes you feel like a superhero. It makes you feel very comfortable with yourself. I learned to love myself, to care for myself, my mind, my body. I learned to accept who I am, my strengths, my weaknesses, my limitations. I know what those are now, and I work with them on a daily basis. So you just get to know yourself very well. And that's a really, I think that's another unique experience that you have when you go through a life-changing journey and you're forced to dig deep down and pull out all of your strength, all of your power, all of your conviction. It's very raw. You know who you are.
The second part to that, and thank you. I mean, I can how transformational this has been for you based on what you're saying and how you're saying it. Is it something that has persisted? I don't know how long ago it was that you did the trail. How many years ago?
It was in 2015, so it was
Okay.
a while ago. It's like
so
8
do you
years.
feel as though those changes have persisted through time, and that they are lasting?
Yes. So some of the things have reverted back. So I said I experience time differently than I used to. I don't quite as much as I used to. So whatever that weird thing was that switched in my brain, I slowly started to revert back to the way things used to be. But that getting to know yourself, you don't turn that back. You don't send that away. Like, I know who I am now. And I have found, and I don't know if it's because of the Camino, I don't know if it's because I'm now in my 40s, but I have continued to build on that confidence and that self-awareness and that learning to care about myself and to take care of myself and to love myself. That's something women especially have a really hard time with. I don't struggle with that anymore. And so that has continued to grow. Also that appetite for pushing my mind and my body. I'm always challenging myself. I always want to grow. I always want to learn. I always want to explore. And that wasn't a part of who I was before. Now that is my personality now. Like, it has changed my person. So yes, it persists.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Other questions for Theresa?
Simple yes, no. Did he charge you for the horses, or was it just a free trail angel thing?
No, that was not a trail angel thing. We paid for it, but it was like 11 euros. Yeah, it's not super expensive there.
And is trail angel a well-known phrase, or did you just make that up, Kathy? I like it.
Theresa used it in the presentation when she was
Okay.
talking about the people who would set free things up and help out, like
Got
the
it.
homeless gentleman.
Got it.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. On the Appalachian Trail, there are trail angels all along. And in fact, my husband and I are trail angels up in Maine, right before people hit the hardest part of the trail, which is in Maine, of course. We set up camp sometimes. We did it like 3 years in a row, and we would just have hot dogs and hamburgers and buns, and everyone who came through got free food. So yeah, they're called trail angels. On the Camino, they're called Camino angels.
Love it. Perfect. Other last minute questions or comments? I have to say, this has been a fantastic program, and honestly, you have made the program what it is. And I thank you truly for bringing this to all of us.
Thank you. And I appreciate you reaching out, because it brings me back. I love talking about it, and I'm more than happy to do it.
Yeah, it's very obvious. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
it's phenomenal. So thank you to everybody for joining us tonight, and a special thanks to you, Theresa. I wish everybody a nice evening, and everybody be safe going home.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all again.
Bye.
Good night.